Hello, beautiful. And what I really want to know is what is good in your life today? I'm Kia, and this is another episode of the Female Veterans Podcast. Today, I have with me someone really, really sweet and kind and incredible. She was a Marine for nearly 5 years in aviation, and her name is Esaia. But before I welcome her to the show officially, I just want to give a big shout out to my sponsor, Grunt, for taking a chance on this girl and sponsoring some episodes with me. Go to gruntstyle.com, check out their apparel. I'm sure you'll like it. You can get your branch and represent your branch t-shirt from their organization. It's officially sanctioned as well. So check out Grunt Style, and they have all sorts of cute stuff there for men, women, and children. And you can use code Baker, which is my last name, and you will get 10% off your first order. So go check out gruntstyle.com. And if you're in Austin, they have a retail location. So if you're in Austin, Texas, go check them out and see what they got there. Anyway, I'm going to shift on over to my guest. And I want to just say thank you for coming to be a guest on the Female Veterans Podcast.
Thank you for having me. I've been an avid listener for the past few months, and I just want to say thank you for what you do as far as putting these stories together and putting them out there, because being able to listen to them has truly been inspirational for myself. And I just want you to know that you are having that impact that you're going for. It's there and it's doing it. And thank you. And thank you for letting me be a part of it.
Oh my God. Thank you so much for saying that, because, I do this and I do a lot of other stuff too, but this podcast is so close to my heart and so important to me that sometimes even when it's a struggle to get an episode out, because, I'm a single mom and I'm doing all this other stuff too, the coaching and all of that, it means everything to me to be able to deliver these and to do these interviews, and to hear feedback like that means absolutely everything. So thank you so much for saying that. I really appreciate it. And let's jump right into it, shall we? So tell me, what made you join the military?
Oh, a big part of it was trying to get away from home, because the way that I grew up, I had 6 sisters and 2 brothers. My parents had me split, got married. Each of the people that they married had a child from a previous relationship. So I have 2 stepsisters, and then they continued to have their individual families. And yeah, I have a lot of siblings.
That's lovely, though. But I was so shocked because in these days and times, people don't want to have more than 2 kids. So what was that like for you? Did you feel like you needed to like it was just too much and you needed to join the military because of that? Or was it just hectic were you bouncing around?
It was hectic. Things were tight. There were a lot of things that happened in my youth that I feel really impacted me growing up, like my grandma passing. My grandpa, as a result, had an accident that required us to completely relocate our family to help take care of him. Just other little things. My stepdad had to have brain surgery at one point. It was a lot growing up, and I knew that there wasn't money for me to go to school.
Mm-hmm.
I had a really hard time in high school. I know now that I have ADHD, and that was something that played a big role growing up. Like, I failed 4 years of English in high school, and for some reason that didn't draw anyone's attention.
Mm-hmm. It was public school though, right?
Yeah, it was public school. One of my other siblings, I'm happy being an older child that my siblings, my parents sort of learned a bit. My siblings are able to get better help and are doing much better in school and everything. But for me, it was like, the military is my way out. They're going to pay for school. I'm going to get to travel. I remember talking to the recruiter and hearing the Marine Corps is the best of the best. So that's the branch I have to join. My mom asked me to go Air Force or Navy, and I was like, nope. Just because you asked, nope.
It's funny that you say that because my mom was like, "You're going to the army." And I was like, "Nope." If I'm going to the military, because I too had to fund my education myself. So, and I too was also escaping sort of a rocky upbringing with my mother's mental health issues to take care of myself. So I totally feel you. And I also rebelled and went to the Navy when she wanted me to go to the Army. So I feel that. I feel that. The Marines, you felt like it was the best of the best, huh?
It felt like a promising challenge. When I did get to high school, I had a teacher my junior year. The way he taught US history was just so inspiring, and it made me, I'm a naturally empathetic person. Maybe it's because of all the siblings and the big family, but I care, and I want to make sure that the people around me are doing okay. And the way he taught his class inspired me to want to do as much as I could. So I really, really wanted to get involved, like maybe in law enforcement or politics. I wanted to, you know, like make the biggest impact that I can in a positive way. To me, the military and especially the Marine Corps felt like it was going to give me that foundation, that structure, the stability, the discipline that I didn't get at home or growing up. And it felt like the way.
Right on.
For the aspect of like politics too, I said that should I be put in a place where I have to make decisions on behalf of people in the military, I wouldn't want to make that decision without having had that experience myself. And I feel like that's something that people should take more into consideration when taking public office and being put in positions of power.
Girl, you said a mouthful right there. No, we don't usually talk politics on the Female Veterans
Sorry.
podcast because it's a bipartisan show. I love all my veteran sisters. I don't care what your personal beliefs are, religious, political, whatever. If you served, we're sisters. And so I try to keep it like that. And I keep my own beliefs out of it. But what you said was really key because I actually really believe that. I believe that it is really important for you to have served in the military before you take an office. I'm not saying that you're not capable, but I'm just saying that it gives you a different perspective and a different understanding that you should have if you're going to be a public servant. And I stand by that. And so I totally agree with what you're saying right there, especially if you're going to be like the president. I really feel like it used to be important for a president to
Yeah.
have served in the military. It was like nearly a requirement, like to do that. And so
experience of life.
Exactly. Exactly. So I do still think that it should be something considered very, very important. But then again, I could be biased because, we served. So okay, so tell me, as a Marine, before I go into that, I really love that you said that it was a promising challenge, which does bring me to my next question about boot camp. What was boot camp like for you?
I loved boot camp. I loved it. And I loved combat training afterwards. I had tried to play softball in high school, and I remember being signed up for a season when I was in like elementary school, but like the discipline aspect and the continued effort that sports took, like it wasn't something that I ever got to fully participate in. So for me, like in school, PE was also a challenge. So for me, having to now run and try to do pull-ups and push-ups and just the physical challenge that the Marine Corps is, I loved it. As much as I struggled with it, and the people that I served with in the fleet know that I struggled very, very hard. Doesn't matter. I loved it. It was the first time like I had to take my physical self serious, like figure out what I was made of, what I was worth, what I could do. I tried to be a squad leader at one point. Like I didn't really stick out in boot camp much or anything, but the camaraderie that was developed there, like I have very vivid, wonderful memories that sometimes I like to just float back to in boot camp. Like I still talk to the girl who was my rack mate. I still talk to just the girls that were in my corner in the squad bay. It's a wonderful thing that I love to see when I check like social media and stuff, the girls that I went to boot camp with, like what they're doing now, who's still in, who started some business or who's in a new marriage or something. Like, I don't know. It's wonderful.
The beauty of social media. We did not have that when I was serving. And so it was really difficult for me to keep in touch with. I haven't kept in touch with anyone I went to boot camp with, but I swear on every episode of this podcast, I'm like, if you went to boot camp in 1994 at Naval Hospital, Great Lakes, and you were in a 900 company, I think it was 908 that we were in. I can't remember. It's been so long. If you were in that company, then hit me up because I'm trying to find my boot camp sisters and see who's doing what, especially Sunny Woolsey. She saved my life after boot camp, like legitimately saved my life. And I think you're the right person for me to actually share that story with. And we'll talk about it later. But she literally saved my career. She saved my life. And I just have never forgotten her. So that's how it is.
To talk to her. I hope that works at some point. I hope that they reach out because
yeah, I loved it. It was really an incredible experience for me, boot camp. I can't say that you had certain excitement when you said that. And I can't say that I had that same excitement about boot camp that I really loved it, but I ended up loving it. Like there was a lot I didn't like about boot camp. There's a lot to not like about boot camp, but there are so many aspects. And I'm certain that Navy boot camp is way easier than what you went through, which was also shocking to me. That it was so much easier than I expected it to be. But I definitely grew to love it. And I will tell you, I did shed some tears when it was over and we were parting ways, So what was training like, your combat training like for you?
That was the taste of like what you see in the commercials and in the recruiting pictures that they show you. Like you're going to be in the dirt. It's going to look like war and that's what it's going to feel like. And like that part of it, I really, really liked. And that was part of what I signed up for too. Because the high school that I went to and the time that I had in high school, I participated in like the GSA, like the Gay Straight Alliance. I was very active and vocal about females being able to do the same things that males can. That was actually something that when I was in boot camp, the CEO, she was a female, Lieutenant Colonel Giordano. She was a wonderful woman. She believed in equalizing the physical standards between the females and the males. She wanted to, demand more of the females. That this is everything that I remember. And I think we were one of her last graduating companies. And later she was retired or relieved or something because she caused so much uproar that they were like, you can't be so vocal about that. Shush, shush. Like, but this is my opinion. Whether that's how that happened and everything, I don't know. But from everything that I read about the situation, like it was such a shame to see her taken out of power because I think that she was doing like all the right things.
Wow. Well, I mean, it wouldn't be surprising. I don't think any of us would be surprised that a woman who was outspoken and very strong was shushed and removed. I don't think it would be any stretch of the imagination. Of course, I don't know the story, but just saying, I don't think any of us would be that shocked, even in today's military.
Yeah, it was 2015. So, yep, not that long ago. But
yeah. Not even 10 years. Not even 10 years. Although I just realized that in a couple of years, it will be 10 years ago. And that seems like a lot. Like, where is the time going? In fact, I can't even believe how long ago it was that I got out of the military over 20 years ago. And it's just amazing to me that where the time went. So tell me, after combat training, what was your active duty experience like?
Well, I went from combat training to Pensacola, Florida, because I was in aviation. I was a flight equipment technician. So that's where our A school was. And I remember it took a little while for us to class up. So I was there from August to December. So I was there for a little bit. After going to boot camp and after doing combat training, that was 4 months of just like continuous, like sticking to a schedule and all of this. and we get to the schoolhouse and you get a bit more freedom. And I'm away from home for the first time. And I'm very young. It was the first time that I got in trouble for drinking. Class was wonderful. Class was great. We were competitive with our grades. And for me, that was fun. But I did get in trouble. And that was the first time, like, it was scary. Like, oh, holy cow, I got in trouble. What am I going to do with my life if this all goes wrong? And I got held for a month after I was supposed to hit the fleet. And so that right there started talk where I was supposed to go.
Oh, okay.
I immediately created a reputation for myself. And it's really hard for me to not beat myself up over that, looking back at it. After I did get to the fleet, I tried really hard. I felt to fit in. There were maybe 3 females in my shop when I got there. And the job that I did, it was checking survival equipment and gear on aircraft. It's all the systems that are supposed to save you should something go wrong with the aircraft. It's a pretty serious job. I remember when I got to the fleet and going to a dinner for someone going away. It was my first time, like, spending time with the guys that I worked with, like, outside of work.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't wear makeup to work, really, because, what's the point of that? But we were going out to dinner. So I got all done up and dressed up and everything. And I remember later being told that they didn't recognize me and that one of the guys thought that I was just like some girl that one of the other guys had brought for dinner.
Oh, really?
That I wasn't the same girl that had been going to work with them and everything. For the first few months, too, they thought that I was a lesbian because the orders of where I was supposed to go got swapped with another girl who is. But that was what they'd heard from Pensacola, Florida, down to Miramar and San Diego, California. These are just all the things that they hear before you even get there. So, yeah, I was a troubled youth. And for the first few months, I was a lesbian without anyone asking me anything.
And so what if you were? I mean, like...
yeah, no, none of those things matter. These are all just things that I remember going through. And I was like, what?
It's funny because I often say a base is a lot like a high school, right? And so I want to back it up a little bit because you were talking about you got into trouble for drinking. So I don't know all the rules on all the bases, but I know the base that I was on. I know that some bases allow you to drink younger than other bases, right? Our base was very strict because we had boot camp side. And so you could not drink until you were 21. So when you say you got in trouble for drinking, were you underage drinking? And that's what you got caught up for?
Yeah, I was underage. We were all in student status. So there were rules like for the weekdays and whatnot, but on the weekends, from what I remember, like they were there were rules about how you can go out in town. Like you had to earn a certain status, be there for a certain amount of time to get certain liberties. But yeah, no, I was underage. And that was the issue when I got caught. But they immediately threw me to like getting evaluated for treatment and things like that. Like that was the first time that was introduced to me.
So I guess my question now is when you had liberty on the weekends, we're young, right? I mean, because this brings me back to the story I was talking about with Sunny Woolsey. And I knew it was going to fit into this episode somehow. But okay, so in an effort to help you feel a little bit better, right, about all of this, I'm going to share. So when I was 19, that's when I I enlisted at 17, but I delayed enlistment and I was 19 when I actually started serving. There was outside of, and if you served at Great Lakes during this time in the mid 90s, you know what I'm talking about. There was this little bakery or like a diner. I think it was on Waukegan Road in Waukegan, Illinois, just in North Chicago area. And next is, I can't remember what it's called, but next to this like little pie bakery diner sort of place, there was a sports bar. Okay. And it had a side entrance. In that sports bar, they served underage military drinks. It was a known thing. It was common knowledge Okay. Everybody knew about it. And I will also say that when I first got stationed at Great Lakes, we were never drug tested. Never. For like the first year I was on the base, there were no drug tests, by the way. And everything in the propaganda was zero drug tolerance policy, no underage drinking. All of these things were very well known things. And that if you got caught doing these things, you would go to captain's mast. That's what we were aware of at the time. So this one particular night, and I think I went to this sports bar twice. Okay. Twice. Right. Which means I was underage drinking. I'm just going to tell you right now. I was underage drinking. Now, the first time I went, I met these guys who gave me Goldschlager, which I will never drink again, by the way. And I really would never drink anything that you can set on fire again, because I learned a lesson that day. But that wasn't the day that I'm talking about. I went another day. I was supposed to have a date with a guy that I knew from boot camp, right? And I wasn't trying to be serious about him, but I thought he was cute. And while we were just out of boot camp, whatever. I was trying to have some fun. And I was supposed to have a date with this guy and a bunch of girls that I knew from boot camp. Some of them were in my A school at the hospital corps, right? We had a lot of freedom right off the bat. So from boot camp to A school, for if you were in the hospital side of that base, for Naval Hospital, Great Lakes, and then you had all the A schools and C schools for everyone else in the fleet on the other side of the base, right? But if you were on hospital side, immediately you got freedom. Like as soon as school was over, you were in civilian clothes and you were doing whatever you wanted, right? It was like very different from boot camp to just then you had class and then you had PT and then you had freedom. It was different. So 2 times I went to this place that I'd heard about. I don't remember how I heard about it. And my friend, Sunny Woolsey and a bunch of other girls were in TPU on the other side of the base, but so we would meet up and go hang out. And this particular time they went with me. And this guy that I'm talking about was in TPU as well. So we all met up at this place, right? And we started drinking. And let me tell you what, I got so drunk. I don't even know, like literally, it was my first time ever being that drunk, maybe my second time ever being that drunk in my life. Okay. I think, no, probably that drunk. It was probably the first time. I mean, my friends looked after me, thank God, because that's what people do. And then this guy that I was supposed to go on a date with arrived late and I was already drunk. So it probably really wasn't a good look in his defense. but he ended up hooking up with one of my good friends from boot camp, right? And they like snuck off and hooked up while I was like drunk talking to other people, right? And so I actually made a boyfriend because of this, because this guy came and told me about it. And I ended up dating him later. Actually, it was kind of smooth the way he did that, looking back. But anyway, the guy who told me that my friend had hooked up with the guy I had been talking to. Anyway, so when I went to leave this place, my friend Sunny said, I think you need to go, right? And she was like, come on. And she took me to the bathroom. She helped me like freshen up or whatever, get myself together, fix my clothes. She put me in a cab and she was like, gave them the address, paid. And she said to me, go straight to your room. She said, when you go through the quarterdeck, don't look anybody, just go straight to your room. Right. So she put me in this cab and she sent me because I was done. Like I was sloppy. Okay. I'm not even going to pretend I was sloppy, a mess. Okay. So I got there and I was like half sleeping in the cab or whatever. Thank God arrived there safely. Right. I think they went with me part of the way and then the rest of the way to the other side of the base. So I think I just had to cross the base by myself. And then I got to the quarterdeck and I went across. And I just kind of like, I didn't look at anyone. I just sort of looked down at the floor and I just kept hearing her voice in my head, like, don't look at anyone, just go straight to your room. So I went to the elevators, went up to my room.
Advice.
But I remember when I got to the quarterdeck, right? I remember the thought of, oh my God, if I screw this up, I'm going to captain's mast and I'm probably getting kicked out of the military because I will be caught underage drinking. I cannot fuck this up. Like, I have to just, and so I kept hearing her voice and I made a beeline for the elevator and I made it up to my room and I went and I slept it off and everything was fine. But it could have very easily went the other way. And by the way, again, shout out to Sunny Woolsey for like saving my career, like, because I was a mess. She looked after me. And that's what I'm talking about veteran sisters and the camaraderie and the family and the sisterhood and things of that nature. Right. And I never saw her again.
That felt like very much like commonplace occurrence in Pensacola. I feel like a school in the military is sort of like a condensed little spring break experience between classes and everything, because that's what it was like on Pensacola. You had Portside and people of age, would go and buy the booze and everything. And all the students that were underage, like, it didn't matter. Like, everyone knew that it was happening. Yeah, everyone, like, command wise was like, no, this zero tolerance. You're not supposed to do this. So if you get caught, like, they're going to destroy you. They're going to ream you to sit and make an example of you. But it's still happening.
Like, and everybody knows it's happening all the way up. So that is my point of, I totally understand how you ended up underage drinking and how getting caught then gave you a reputation that you had to then sort of try to overcome moving forward. And then you get to your new command and they've already got preconceived notions about you. Right. Which I know all of us understand. It happens. It happened to me, moving from one clinic to another clinic, and I had to overcome the reputation. Girl, you're preaching to the choir about having a reputation. Okay. Let me just say, you will find out in the book that's in progress right now.
So excited for it.
But truthfully, like, my reputation very nearly ended me in the brig. So when I tell you I had such a great experience in the military until the day I didn't, there's a reason for that. And ultimately, all of those experiences, what I witnessed and experienced myself, led to the creation of this podcast so that you could hear both the good and the bad stories of our experiences and the real talk like we're having right now. Yes, we were underage drinking. Yes, we were doing that. And that's not all. Here we go. So, and then you got to your next duty station and they thought you were like a lesbian, which would have totally been fine, but it wasn't true. And then you go out with them for the first time. I also had that experience, never wore makeup to work. I always wore glasses. And then I remember finally getting contacts and putting makeup on and going out, and the reactions of everybody, very similar, totally feel that vibe. But after that happened to you, did it change how they viewed you in the workplace, is my question.
I feel like it maybe did. It's so hard for me to look at like workplace behavior and be like, look at it objectively, because I know that I helped like participate in, I don't know what other word to use for it except for like shit fuckery. Because it's like, you talk to anyone else in the Marine Corps and they're going to tell you, and I hate how true it is. If I could show you the videos that I have on my phone of just the horsing around at work, the wrestling, the comments made, the conversations had, like, it's raunchy, disgusting, horrible stuff that you wouldn't expect. I haven't gone back to work since I got out of the military, but like, I don't know how I'm going to go back to work and like have normal conversations with people. And that's the God honest truth. And I don't say that a lot, but it's true.
I feel you. And I think we all understand. And that was one of the biggest things for me going into the civilian world after I got out. And I went into corporate America, which was very different in the late 90s, early 2000s than it is now. And I just didn't really know how to assimilate because it was so different. The water cooler talk was vastly different. The humor in the military, in any branch, is going to be shocking for most other people. And as a woman in this predominantly male culture, Now, for in the hospital corps, we have a lot of women. At least we did on my base. So I wasn't in a job where there were just very few women. So I can imagine how much worse the humor is, because it's like, it's either you're one of the guys, and I definitely had a large group of guy friends where I was like one of the guys. So because of how I am, this sort of raunchier humor never affected me in a negative way. Like, but some women do find that repulsive, right? And it does bother them and it makes them feel harassed if they're in that environment. For me, it didn't bother me. For example, I have a Master Chief that I absolutely think of so fondly to this day, who would come in around 3 p.m. every afternoon when I worked in the records office and tell a dirty joke. And with his mug, I can still see him in, in his khakis with his mug that smelled of some sort of booze and tell a dirty joke to like maybe 2 guys and 3 women who were all under the age of 25. Okay. So, right. Like, so, but I look back at him fondly, whereas that was really sexual harassment. Okay. If you call a spade, this is what it was. He should not have been doing that. But for me, it didn't bother me. Someone else, it probably made them uncomfortable. Now, I had another senior chief who made us all feel uncomfortable. It was completely different. The one that actually replaced him made us all feel super, super uncomfortable. And I definitely had run-ins with different people of authority that made me feel very uncomfortable as a young woman at different points in my career. But that was not one of them. If it was humor, and in fact, humor is actually how I diffused a lot of those more harassing situations. That was always my way of dealing with it, was like laughing it off and then getting myself out of the situation. You know what I mean? And then, typically letting it go.
That's all you have in those situations. Like, you can't directly say anything back, and all you can do is say something funny, or otherwise you yourself might lose your shit in that moment, and that's not safe for your career.
No. And, there's always this looming, we talk about it a lot on this podcast. There's always the looming fear of being that girl, the one that can't take a joke, the one who's not cool, the one who then becomes the target all the time. But really, that girl is just a girl who doesn't want to take anybody's shit, and she's vocal about it. Okay, so once you're there and you're dealing with a lot of shit fuckery, how did you manage to fit in?
I was young and I was in the barracks, and I made friends with people that were like me. They just were from other shops, because I felt already ostracized in my own work center, because that's how it was for maintenance. You were like broken up into little sections. It's sort of like if you were to look at a high school and look at all the different little sport teams, like those were your cliques. And I felt like I just wasn't clicking with my team. So instead of hanging out with the football players, I went to go hang out with the volleyball players.
I feel that too. Although I liked my team, both of them, when it was at medical records crew or the pharmacy crew, but I was always at the other teams too. And people who knew me back then say that they don't know how I got any work done, because I'd never seemed like I was in my workspace. That I was a very free-spirited. Have you listened to my interview with my girl, Jana, who served with me? She says that a lot. It's a big interview and her story's huge. But she says that a lot in that interview, that I was just always sort of like a butterfly flitting around from place to place. But that's what I was doing. I was out with the other teams, so to speak, in the other workspaces, like sort of kind of hanging out as often as I could. I mean, obviously I did have to do work, but you know how it is. You make the day go by.
I very much identify with a lot of that as far as my experience. The other thing that I struggled with when I first got there was my weight. I was literally 2 pounds over my max, and that immediately became an issue that was like hyper focused on. So when I said that there were 3 other females that I worked with, one was immediately assigned as my mentor, and I'm still friends with her to this day. She is an amazing woman, an even better Marine. She is someone that I look to for advice constantly. She's like a big sister to me. I love her. So she's one of the best things to ever happen in my life. But initially, when she was put as my mentor, it wasn't great because I felt now like the fat girl too on top of it. And looking back, I was a healthy
2
weight.
pounds?
2 pounds. That was 2 pounds over. But once it became like hyper focused on, then now I was eating to cope. So now I'm eating and I'm drinking to cope. So I'm more over my weight and I'm struggling at PT, and it's an even bigger issue at work. It was a lot. So that's on top of the issues with the drinking, not feeling like I'm blending in at work. What I was doing every weekend to cope was binge drinking with those other shops. So about 6 months into me being in the fleet, I got in trouble for drinking again for underage drinking. And the way that the night started out was the roommate that I had come back to our room trashed. So I took care of her, and she wound up getting sick all over our bathroom. I put her in the shower. She was from another shop, and we didn't really get along much, but I didn't want her to get in trouble or anything. So yeah, you came back to our room trash. I'm going to take care of you. I put her to bed and everything. But at that point, like, I'm really frustrated and flustered because I had my own plans that night.
Mm-hmm.
I wound up meeting up with my friends, and I was so frustrated and angry that I just started downing drinks. And I don't remember leaving the barracks and the smoke pit because we had a safe plan. We were walking to the gate to get into an Uber to go to downtown San Diego to dance and have fun. But I was so mad and infuriated. I downed 151 really, really fast.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. 19. No one ever taught me how to drink safely or smart. My parents smoke a lot of weed. That's what I grew up around. No education around drinking. So again, being free and on my own in my downtime, like, that's just what I was doing all the time. And that's what was cool too in the barracks was
everybody was drinking.
Yeah, everyone got off work and then it was time to drink. But yeah, so we wound up leaving the barracks and walking to the gate, and I have no memory. But I guess I got really, really sick, like right as we got to the gate. So they wound up calling PMO, and supposedly I was taken in an ambulance to Balboa, but they just gave me an IV and told me not to get that drunk again. My stomach wasn't pumped or anything. I was put into bed and told to sleep it off for a few hours. I was taken back to my barracks room the next day. It was reported to my chain of command, and I was NJP'd for it, which is like the equivalent of captain's mast. And that was my first NJP. That happened in July of 2017. No, in July of 2016. At that point, I lived under a microscope because I'd gotten in trouble in A school, and now I'd gotten in trouble in the fleet. And I'd ruined my shops. My shop was full of heavy, heavy drinkers, but somehow they managed to keep things hush-hush enough to where their alcohol-related incident board had like 900 days ARI free, and now I'd ruined that.
I just think it's interesting that there's a board up to show.
Oh, right? Yeah. If you can go 90 days without an ARI, typically, at least in our squadron, they'd give you a 72, so a 3-day weekend. But that was if the CO cares to implement it, because sometimes you'll go months and months, and yeah, you have all these days ARI free, but no one's getting a 72. But then you get a new CO, and he notices it, he cares. He's like, 72 is for everyone.
Isn't that how it works? It all depends on leadership. But I just think it's interesting. We did not have a board like that. Okay, by the way. So in a way, to me, that's like you have a reward system set up in place to keep you from having alcohol-related incidents, which means that there's been a lot of alcohol-related incidents. So they need to put a reward system in place. See, therein lying the problem that no one's talking about. Okay. I'm just going to point that out real quick in case no one noticed that.
Well, what's better is that afterwards, the sergeant major that we had at the time, and wonderful, wonderful, amazing sergeant major, cared so much about his people, like took the time and effort to individually understand what was going on. After I got in trouble for this, like, and I explained to them everything that happened, and the way that it happened, because, you know, most commands, they'll dig and they'll try and like nail down whoever they can in the situation. But the way I told them, and the way every time I got in trouble, was, this is my fault. This is what I did. I want to take accountability and responsibility for my actions. I don't want to involve, like, this isn't anyone else's fault. No one else should be in trouble for this.
So you didn't snitch on anybody, essentially,
Yep.
that you were drinking with.
Yep.
Straight up.
The sergeant major gave me the option to go to, they held like an educational brief for the NCOs, and I got to stand up there as an example of why not to give alcohol to minors.
Wow.
Meet this PFC Gonzalez, tell him what happened. And I did that. And I think it's a good thing that he did that. And I hope, if anything, that some of those NCOs learned from that, not to contribute and distribute. But yeah, no, that was one of the things that happened after that.
Whoa. So what I'm hearing, though, and I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one, is that there was an entire culture of alcoholism, and you, a young girl who was having all these other issues, fitting in, dealing with body image issues, as we all do, without it being hyper focused on top of it, and having all of these things happening to you in an environment where drinking was the norm and what you did. I don't know how more people weren't getting in trouble.
There was always someone on EPD, is what it seemed like. And that was part of the culture in the barracks, was there was like a group of people who had been in trouble. And these are just the people, like the shitbags. That's just what they get deemed. And then you're stuck in this purgatory of everyone knows what you did and how are you supposed to climb out of it. But everyone's telling you too, like, hey, don't let this get you down. Don't let this ruin your career. You can rise above this. But like, the actuality of that happening and feeling it, like, is really, really hard.
Were you stationed there the whole time for your 5 years?
Yep.
So,
yeah.
Wow.
Because what happened after that first incident, the gunnery sergeant that I had, so every time anything came up, like, and they needed a volunteer, like, my hand was up. Like, I joined to get away my silly butt when I was in Pensacola. Part of what I got in trouble there for was the boy who was in my class. We were competing and stuff because we were flirting. We were sort of like involved with each other. And so when the orders got dispersed, there was one set to Hawaii and the rest were all to Pendleton or Miramar, so Southern California. And we were all like, we're all going to stay friends and we're all going to stay together and we're all going to go to Southern California. When in reality, I should have taken those orders to Hawaii and I should have gotten farther away instead of going back to, I'm from Northern California. I don't need to be in California. I should have gone somewhere way farther. But yeah, so being where I was after I got in trouble, I was always volunteering. And I remember there was a deployment that came up and one of the guys who was signed up for it, he failed his PFT and I was home on leave and they called to tell me, hey, so-and-so failed his PFT. You're next on the list. You're going to Japan instead. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, that's fine. Like, I'm totally on board with that. Go through like a 24-hour cycle of like me telling my family, like, hey, this is going to happen, emotionally accepting that that's what's going to happen. Like, I was excited. And then I get a call the next day from my gunnery sergeant that says, if you were going anywhere, you would have heard it from me. You're not going anywhere. And that was what happened with everything after that. Like, no matter what I volunteered for, like, it didn't matter. The answer was no. I had a female staff sergeant who returned to the fleet, came and saw that this was going on and tried to put me on other things. She tried to put me on another deployment as like a legal aid. She tried to pull me out of this hole and he blocked it every time. Just, I wasn't allowed to progress or do anything different. And I had guys in my shop that like implemented their own forms of punishment afterwards too. Like just stupid things. Like one of them, the chow hall was really far from our work center because we were on the flight line. So I'd have to walk all the way to the chow hall to get my food, to walk all the way back. And then at that point, I wouldn't technically have time to eat my food. So I was giving the guys my cards and they were going to get the food for me and they were doing that. And my supervisor was like, nope, you guys aren't allowed to help her out. Like, she put herself in this hole. Like, she has to do it herself. Like, that was my life after that.
So persecution.
Yeah.
I witnessed that as well with my friend John. He dyed his hair blonde. He had strawberry blonde hair, by the way. He dyed it like a lighter yellow blonde. And when we had uniform inspection, he failed. Okay. So I also failed. But then let me tell you, my uniform was pristine. The reason I failed was because I had braids in my hair. And the woman who did my inspection was unaware of the new regulation for hair braids and failed me because of my hair, which I then fought and won, by the way. But it also labeled me a troublemaker, right? So I kind of get that. So there I was with all the people who failed their uniform inspection. And I was witnessing this kid I had just met getting reamed. His uniform was flawless, but because of his hair was dyed a lighter shade of blonde, and the chief did not like it. And so when he said he challenged him on the regulation, he really didn't like that. And after that, you might as well have painted a bullseye on that kid's back. I'll just leave it there. But I witnessed some things that let's just say my naivete and idealism about the world and how good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people that I had when I was like 19 and 20 years old began to really die. That's the way I can put it, from the things that I did witness anyway. So I understand how you felt. Some of the things that they made him do, I saw little punishments like that. For example, he was brilliant at phlebotomy, was a phlebotomist in the lab. He loved it. He was so happy there. And then he had to go to like work an STD clinic. You know what I mean? Or when that didn't seem to bother him and he made that even into a positive experience, they took him out of the clinic altogether and like made him have this space in sort of this building outside of the clinic, sort of like a garage. And he had to go pick up cigarette butts and like go around and like, so like little menial jobs like that. And then, they didn't want to deal with him. He ended up getting administratively discharged after 2 years, but 2 times they tried to put him in the brig. That's how it evolved. Like they just kept looking for a reason.
And I feel like that's how they do it. It's frustrating because on the one hand, yes, I take accountability for everything that I did. Like I accept my part and in what I did. But like sometimes the command's response to something like can just be too much. Because that happened, let's see, that was 2016. So I was a couple months into the fleet the first time I got NJP'd. A whole another year after that, I got NJP'd again because I didn't lose rank the first time. I think I did get put on restriction and I was given extra punitive duties. So, I'm not allowed out of uniform. I have to walk to check in and everything. And so when I got NJP'd again, I was continuing to drink. I was continuing to get in trouble for little things like being late, not being prepared for PT, stuff here and there. But it's like every single aspect, like you can get in trouble for, like that's what I was getting in trouble for, just over and over and over again. And I got a new division head and a new OIC. And they looked at all these little things and they said she needs to be held accountable. And they wrapped them all up in a nice little package for another NJP. I think this time I did lose rank. I got dropped from a Lance Corporal down to a PFC. I don't want to say that I was ever like a really shiny, squeaky, wonderful, perfect Marine, but like all these things kept happening, and like my own self-worth, like I felt it just start to disappear. Because I went through that second in JP, and this is where that sergeant major that I mentioned before comes in, because he was a wonderful, wonderful man. There were people who wanted to push administrative paperwork to get me out, but they said no, she needs treatment, and they sent me to an inpatient for 35 days. And I am so grateful to have been through that, because that experience is that's where I met the father of my kids. It's where I made some lasting friends. I learned a lot. I got sober for the first time. Those 35 days inpatient were amazing and wonderful, and that wouldn't have happened had it not been for the Marine Corps. But everything leading up to that, like, I can look back now and acknowledge that I was in a lot of pain, but like that didn't register for me at the time. I just kept drinking, and I just kept going to work, and I kept trying to do what I thought I was supposed to do.
I understand completely. I understand. It's a lot, A lot of people don't realize that you can get into a cycle like that. And you can't, I mean, it could have happened to me. I could have continually kept drinking and developed a problem. It could have happened so easily. It's just, I was so scared after that first moment that I said, I'm not going to do that again. And then I met that boyfriend, and that wasn't really his scene. So it kind of like, you know what I mean? It took me in a different direction, but it's so easy to happen. Lots of other things happened after that, but a lot of people have these like very squeaky, beautiful careers. I did this interview with Captain Pat Williams that made me wonder if I was in the same military as her. But it was so amazing. And that's why I like to hear those stories. But the fact of the matter is, there's so many of us that have this experience where it is a drinking culture and nobody's talking about it. No one's talking about what happens when, the drinking gets out of control. And it's common. This is a common story, but people aren't as open to talk about it. And I love how you take responsibility, because it is choices. I chose to drink that much at that place. If one thing had gone differently and I would have went to captain's mass, right, it would have been on me. But at the same time, be that as it may, it was part of the culture that I was in. It was acceptable. It was what people were doing. And you know what? You're young, you're away from home, you're on your own for the first time. Like you said, no one taught you how to be a responsible drinker. You're just sort of figuring this out by being in the environment, and it's part of the culture that you found yourself in. Yet, because you were unable to be a responsible drinker and to know, like, if you have no one teaching you this, then that's how you end up getting into trouble, and clearly developed an alcoholism problem with all the other pressures going on, and then feeling persecuted, having body image issues, not feeling, accepted in your work environment, which is very stressful, and feeling like an outsider in an environment where conformity is a necessity. This is like how I felt.
I just want to fit in.
Exactly. But I was the opposite. When I was serving, I had such a hard time because I felt like I just couldn't fit in, that I just didn't belong there the entire time, that I just didn't belong there. And it was difficult for me. I mean, I put the uniform on, I did my job to the best of my ability. I tried to keep my head down. I tried to stay out of trouble, but I didn't even have a lot of the issues that you were having, meaning the treatment from people around me. I had some things happen, yes, that were upsetting, but I completely rebelled against the system just because I just did. I don't know. I didn't know even how to explain it, but I absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, had sort of like a break where I was like, not like a psychotic break, but like a break in my mind where I was like, I don't know how I'm going to make it through these 5 years on active duty. And I need to figure out how I'm going to get through this. Right. And so I started looking for ways to help me do that. And a lot of people are doing that. They're just drinking. So I learned a few years in that drinking, after that experience, I knew drinking was not my escape. So I found other ways to escape while I was serving. So, I mean, I get it. And I'm glad we're having this conversation too, because I think a lot of other people felt the same way or had similar experiences. Maybe they didn't get in trouble. Maybe they got away with it, but it doesn't mean that that wasn't happening, is my point.
That was one of like, I'll get really, really sad and down about it when I talk about it. But there are other times where I think about all the times that I was on restriction. And, you know, you have to go check in with someone who's a much higher ranking enlisted person, like a staff sergeant or a gunnery sergeant or something. And, you know, they always ask, well, what are you in trouble for? Blah, blah. And you wind up having that conversation with them. And sometimes those conversations are where like you learn the most. Every time that I got in trouble and I got given the ear of a senior enlisted, like I also got to sit there and learn directly from them. Like that time that I spent also in SART, the substance abuse rehabilitation program, the amount of people that I met in there, because it's blended every single branch, the people that I met in there and the stories and stuff that you hear, you know, it's all either through AA or some other program or whatnot. So I can't, you know, give any details, but like the things that you hear, the people that you meet, like it's amazing some of the stuff that people go through while also fulfilling their enlistment. Like it's crazy. I would go home on leave, and when my mom listens, she's not going to be happy. I would go home on leave and my family struggled with being homeless. And that was something that I wasn't allowed to talk about. Because out of respect for my parents, and you know, that's how however they're handling their situation, you know, I'd go home and that's the situation that I'd see my siblings in, and then I'd have to go back to work. And I know now that there were resources and stuff that I could have utilized had I talked to someone, but everything that I'd been through at that point, like I didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't know what to talk about or who to trust. Like there's so much during my time in that, like, hindsight's 2020. I wish I could have done differently. But once I did get sober, things did get a lot better. You know, I went through that treatment and I went back to my command and I felt like things were getting better. I did get diagnosed with depression and I started taking medication for the first time. Started to dig up, deal with, and address some of the childhood trauma that I grew up with. Like it was a big period of growth, and doing all of that and going to work where they tell you, you know, utilize mental health resources and all this jazz. But then the guys that you work with at the same time are like, oh, that's stupid. You shouldn't need that. Or, you know, they tell you it's not going to affect your pros and cons, and it's not going to affect how people view you and whatnot. But the way that it comes out, you just know that that's not true. Like, oh, Gonzalez has to go to this appointment now. Oh, Gonzalez is considered high risk now. Oh, Gonzalez has to go check in here for this now. And it's just not the same. And it's never going to be the same. At least that's not how it felt.
There's definitely a stigma around mental health, you know. But I'm just glad, because I was thinking as you were telling your story earlier, is anybody going to send this girl to rehab? And I'm so glad that they did that for you. And that was the turning point for you. And that you did end up going to therapy. Because I think a lot of us, one of the reasons I asked what made you join the military is because I noticed that a lot of us are escaping something. And we go to the military, you know, yes, part of it might be for college education or for benefits or to see the world. But for a lot of us, it's to have a chance at a better life than the one we're trying to leave behind. You know, and I'm so glad that you ended up getting therapy and going on meds and doing the healing work to try to recover from some of the childhood traumas and things that you had experienced that led to the drinking, because without clearing out the root, you know what I mean? Like, that's just like putting on a band-aid of the problem. The only thing about that is just like what you said, it can be such a stigma in your workplace to even go to rehab, to even go for mental health services. And then you have to deal with the fallout on a day-to-day basis. And it's like a vicious cycle. You know, all of these stressors that are leading you to want to take that drink. And then you go and you get clean and you get the help. And then there's more stressors. So
a lot of it, I found that in the rooms of recovery and whatnot, you know, it's people have to want it and they have to want it for themselves. So yeah, the military has these things that get implemented when, you know, situations happen, like someone gets a DUI and they get automatically sent to behavioral health and all that jazz. But like, if they're not ready to stop all this treatment and stuff that you're shoving down their throat, like, it's not necessarily going to work.
mm-hmm.
And, you know, I watched people that got in trouble at the same time as me, you know, stuck on the same like punishment regimen, like, you know, sit there and go through the treatment. They hated it. Like, that to them, like, at that point it's punishment, and it's not doing what you intend for it to do. So yeah, that sergeant major and the CO who helped like put me onto that, I am so grateful for them, like, all the time. Like, I will never forget their names. I periodically touch base with that sergeant major just because I'm so grateful, and he's such a wonderful leader. In there, I met who is now my partner, Matthew. He's the father of my children. And when we met, he was going through his own stuff. He was getting medically retired from the Navy. He did 11 years in service, 9 years at sea. One of the rules in recovery is you're not supposed to like start dating in the first year and whatnot, but we wound up doing that. And while he was getting medically retired from the Navy, at this point, I'm on like year 4 of my enlistment. I've been out of rehab for a while and been going to work, and things seem to be going well. You know, I'm still stuck under the microscope, constantly being checked in on. You know, am I going to my appointments? Am I taking my medication? Am I doing what I'm supposed to? Like, we decided to have a baby. I got pregnant and he got out. He'd been given a diagnosis of PTSD, combat related, on top of all the other ways that he grew up. That's his story and his to tell, not mine. But it was a lot. There was a lot going on personally for me. And it was really hard going to therapy and learning, you know, what's healthy and what's good for you and whatnot, and then going to work and it just being the complete opposite. You know, the orders that are being given, the way people are being treated.
I can see how that would feel very confusing, going to therapy and seeing, oh, this is how things are supposed to go. These are, you know, the ways of healthy behaviors. And then that's exactly the opposite of what you're experiencing at your workstation.
Another hurtful aspect was, you know, I'd go to work and I'd see the guys doing a lot of the same things that I did. And this isn't to take away from, you know, me taking accountability and responsibility for what I did, but a lot of the things that I did do, I'd watch the guys do, and like, it wasn't taken as seriously. Like, it was all, oh, hush, hush, they're important to the work center, those sort of things. The way things went at work afterwards, when I found out I was pregnant, you know, I told my work center, and then I had to be relocated to another work center. So all that time that I spent trying to get out of there, the thing that finally did it was me being pregnant. And I didn't get a say about where I was going.
They just sent you out when you got pregnant.
Yeah. So all these things within the work center that I kept trying to do to try to like help myself progress, to try to make rank, to try to appease everyone so that I could still have a career somehow. It was futile. It was to no avail until I got pregnant. And then they moved me up to quality assurance because I worked intermediate level maintenance. So where we were at, we didn't work directly on the aircraft. Things were removed from the birds and brought to us. And then we'd tinker on them and then they'd get sent back and installed. So now I'm no longer working in my job. I'm now doing a different job. And I had to go through all this training, all these qualifications. And it was frustrating still too that all these times I got in trouble and on paperwork I made to feel horrible. Like it didn't change my work ethic. It didn't change how I was at work. It didn't change my responsibilities. Like you would think that, someone getting in trouble for all these things, like you wouldn't trust them with the monthly maintenance plan. You wouldn't trust them to go to these meetings on behalf of our work center. You wouldn't be giving me training modules, like being put in charge of everyone else's training schedules. Like here I have no rank, but I'm still being given the responsibilities of equivalent to my time in service. So that was frustrating.
I can just imagine. I can just, and then with a reputation and not being able to get ahead and not being able to like sort of shift into a better experience, you're just stuck. And that's what your military experience is, because you're on the same base. Maybe if you had gotten a chance to get to another base, you would have had an entirely different experience, or the reputation would have preceded you. You just never know. But at least you would have had a chance to try. It just makes me so sad that everything was shot down for you. I had another episode like this with VR Small, and everything she tried to do was shot down. And I kept saying, why did they just hate? Like, why did they hate you so much? You're just trying to do, have this amazing career and eventually she ended up getting out of the military because she just it soured her on the experience. And I definitely believe that the military, no matter what branch, loses a lot of amazing, talented women and men because of situations like this, where they feel like they just can't get ahead of whomever doesn't like them or whatever's holding them back. They can't get away from that reputation. They can't get away from that supervisor that just, can't stand them. So, or for whatever reason, they can't progress in some way. So it's just really frustrating to see because there's so much talent that's lost that way.
I completely agree. Because like I said, those people that I watched like get in trouble alongside me, some of them, did horrible things and deserved their punishments, and other ones were like I knew one guy who joined because his dad was a master chief. That was the only reason he joined. He had no desire to be in the military whatsoever, but he's out now and he works for some tech company, and he has a daughter who's about the same age as my son, and we still talk, and like he's doing wonderful now.
Yeah. And this is why I think a lot of people get out of the military and they don't talk about their military service at all. Like, I've had several guests tell me no one knew that they had been in the military for like 10 or 15 years after they got out of the military. And especially, women, especially if there was, some type of harassment or a MST or something like this. This is why I say all the time, I don't know anyone who hasn't at least witnessed some type of bullying or harassment or persecution or homophobia or sexism or something. Yeah, I mean, you saw it. You might not have experienced it. It may not have happened to you, but you saw it happening to somebody, and you may not have said anything because you didn't feel like you could. And okay, I get it. But so when you hear these kinds of stories, you have to have a bit of compassion for them. You know what I mean? I'm not having any judgment for you for getting into trouble. I I will tell you right now, almost 50% of the people that I knew and were friends with while I was serving got into trouble. Went to the brig, got discharged from the military early for all sorts of reasons. But during that time, and granted, it was peacetime when I was serving, I came in at the end of the Gulf War. So I served a little bit during the Gulf War, and then most of my time was after. And there were different stressors during peacetime. But there was stress nonetheless. And so a lot of people got into trouble, and they were good people. They were amazing people. I saw a lot of people feel ashamed, and I saw a lot of people end their military service with great sadness and frustration. And you know what? A lot of those people went on to have amazing careers, amazing lives, and succeed exceptionally well. It was just youth and frustration and the environment, and they made their choices, the culture. But I totally understand where you're coming from. So I just wanted to make that point. So tell me about your transition out of the military.
After I had my son in 2019. Matthew got out of the Navy in 2019 as well. We moved into military housing because I got BAH approved. All these constantly getting knocked down and never having any rank. I never made much money, and I didn't learn much about financials, and then throw the drinking on top of that. Like, I was a financial mess. But finally getting things together and learning, having a child and needing to figure those things out. I did a lot of growing up in that year, but my transition out of the military was really, really difficult because I tested positive for cannabis 6 months before my EAS. It's really hard for me to talk about, not just because I broke my commitment to the Marine Corps, but because I was a new mom. That anytime I tell someone about what happened, it's like I relive that shame all over again. I was screamed at by several different people about how I'm a horrible mother and I'm just hiding behind my family, that I shouldn't smoke pot and breastfeed my child and all these different things. And cannabis wound up in our home because I recommended that Matthew use it for his PTSD. And I saw the relief that it was bringing him. And having already been diagnosed with depression and taking medication for it, I knew before I got pregnant that I was more at risk of postpartum depression. But I decided to have a kid knowing the risks, but it was hard. It was hard after he was born. I loved my son with all of my heart, but I had a really hard time after he was born. And, I'd smoke and I could do things. I could get up and I could do the dishes and I could clean up and I could, but my command didn't care to understand any of that.
They wouldn't.
And we just gotten a female sergeant major, so I took a tougher stance. So I got NJP'd for a third time, and I was given extra punitive duties that I had to do after work. At this point, I'm working full time. I'm pumping at work. Zephyr is going to the Child Development Center on base. Like, to me, I felt like I was doing everything right. Like, I felt like I was accomplishing a lot. Like, I felt like life was good. Things were finally getting better at work. Like, it felt like such a good spot. And then I tested positive and everything just was destroyed. Because after that first pop, even though I stopped, I popped again a couple months later. So the levels were lower, and my psychiatrist was starting to talk to me about ADHD and was trying to change my medication. So I tried a new medication and I had zero appetite. So I used cannabis again and I popped again. So over the course of like 4 months, I popped 3 times. So I got NJP'd for a fourth time, and the restriction that they had suspended from my third, but in this incident, the first NJP, they vacated the suspensions and now they were implementing restriction. So I was restricted to the base. And when these things happened, and it was just for my drinking early on, like alone, like restriction, it's not that big of a deal. It's like being grounded by your parents. Like I know that I should take that more seriously, but in hindsight, looking at it, like it's whatever. But now with a 10-month-old infant that I'm breastfeeding, being restricted to the base is not really an option. And with Matthew being freshly out of the Navy and in his transition, I was really worried about the stress that the situation was causing him because his background, he has childhood trauma revolving around stuff with his own mother. So the situation, him seeing me separated from our son did a lot to him.
It's triggering.
Yeah. And he was with wounded warriors at the time. And again, this was all stuff that I tried to present to my command, and they just were not hearing any of it. Because I was breastfeeding, they reported us to Child Welfare Services in San Diego. We had to see a social worker. We got coupled with the public health nurse. The public health nurse was wonderful. She was so helpful through all of it. She directly tried to call my CO to tell him, like, why are you putting this family through all of this? This is unnecessary. She didn't care. She did not care whatsoever that I was using cannabis. Like anyone outside of the Marine Corps did not care.
No. In fact, my friend, Sandra, who is known as the Kush Nurse, she has a podcast called The Kush Nurse. She is a huge advocate for mothers who smoke and the benefits. I also suffered with postpartum, and I didn't smoke at the time, but I suffered for 3 years until my family did an intervention on me to get me some help because of postpartum. And I was a smoker before I got pregnant. And because I believed all of the stigma and the propaganda around it, also I didn't feel well. Like I couldn't smoke weed when I was pregnant because I didn't feel well. But I'm understanding the new science around it now more and more, thanks to people like Sandra, thanks to my friends from Do the Pot and The High Guide, all amazing podcasts for women who are interested in marijuana and the benefits of it, whether you are a mother or not, or whatever you're suffering with. It's so good for you. And to listen to you say you could get up and do the dishes, I totally feel that. And I know so many of us feel that. And so even though it was a bad thing, and I like shuddered when you said that they put your family in the system. Once you get into the child services system, it's really hard to get out. They are very in your business. And I'm a child who grew up in the system, in and out of the system. So I know kind of a bit about it. And it's just, it's tough. But yet again, you met someone there that was amazing and helpful for you, kind of like when you went to rehab. So these bad things that, quote unquote, bad things that happened led you to people who really helped you move to the next level in your healing.
That period that I spent on restriction was especially difficult because here I am checking in for restriction at this point so far in. I've also now found out that I'm pregnant.
Oh my God.
My second. Yep. So now that they've vacated the suspensions, I've lost all rank. I'm a private with 4 years in service.
Oh no.
Checking in for restriction in maternity camis. It was I had that conversation like every day for 45 days with someone new on duty. What are you in trouble for? Oh, well, this and that and the other. And the whole time too, I have to prep and get ready for a discharge review board. And I somehow have to put together a binder's worth of, like, I can't come up with any self-worth, but I'm supposed to present myself as worthy enough to the Marine Corps to finish my contract so that I don't lose my benefits. And like I told you before, I'm so, this is my fault. This is my doing. Like, I talked to my therapist, she's going to say that that's the trauma speaking. But
good point.
And so this is my fault that I don't want to ask anyone for help. I don't want to ask for these letters from people. I mean, I wound up doing it and I wound up getting a few, but like I remember sitting in Key Dunk and making these phone calls, and it was hard. I'm so grateful to every person who did write one of those letters, for every person who did pick up the phone when I was making those phone calls, because it was a difficult time. I wound up having to ask my family, the family that I love with all of my heart, but is not the most healthy. I had to ask them for help. They wound up taking our son for a month, because when they put me on restriction, they said it was generous of them to give me 2 hours of visitation daily.
Oh my God.
So for 2 hours out of the day.
To see your baby?
To see my baby. My 10-month-old baby.
That feels cruel.
Which there is a naval order that states that a new mother is non-deployable for the first year after birth to protect the mother's ability to breastfeed, to protect her bond to that child, all the healthy things. But the lawyer that was appointed to me when I tried to bring that up is like, hey, can you use this in my defense? He's like, well, you're a Marine. What if you deployed anyways? As much as he said he was fighting for me, I didn't feel like he believed in it as much as he said he did.
Yeah. Energy doesn't lie. And that's cruel. And that type of only seeing your new baby for 2 hours a day, that's like damaging to both mother and child. I mean, I've heard a lot of things, but that is one of the worst things I've heard.
All the while, I just had to be grateful that I wasn't in the brig. That was pretty much what I kept being told. And it got to a point where I'm at a point where I'm going to work because my son's with my family in Northern California and I'm restricted to the base. I missed my son's first birthday.
Oh my God. That is
sorry.
Cruel. No, honey, take your time. I think every mother, every woman could understand. That's just.
And this is where I say that we had a female sergeant major. And I remember there were periods where like I'd run into her in the bathroom and she would be the sweetest thing. Like you felt like she wanted to support you and she cared. And, you could trust her. And I tried to, I did. And then it'd be the following workday and I'd be getting called into her office because I spoke to her and I didn't go through my gunnery sergeant. So now he's getting yelled at and I'm getting yelled at. And everyone between us is getting yelled at because I thought it was okay to talk to her in the hallway because she approached me.
That's crazy.
Like that was the sort of stuff that just went on for that whole duration.
That's crazy.
When my family came to pick up my son for the visitation that day, because it was written in the restriction order that I was allowed to be visited by family, and it said like specifically to include, because my partner, my fiance, we're not married. We weren't married at the time. They had to write it in there specifically that he was allowed for the visits. So when my sister and my stepdad came, they came all the way from Northern California to come get my son because of the situation that we're in. I got screamed at the next day. I thought it was okay because the order said family, and that's my sister and my stepdad. That's my family. So how was I supposed to know that they weren't allowed to come for the 2-hour visit for me to say bye to my son? And then after my son was out of the area and Matthew tried to come for one of the 2-hour appointed visits, he no longer counts as my family because he doesn't have my son.
Wow.
Because we're not married, it doesn't count.
Wow.
because I didn't do what all the guys who hit the fleet and get pregnant do, because we didn't go run and get married. We don't have any sort of protections in our relationship. Just doesn't count the same.
Right. I can imagine how hard that must have been for you. And then you've got you're pregnant. So not only do you have a baby, but you're creating a baby. So all sorts of hormones going through your body and all of this stress, just so not good for you.
I'm supposed to be transitioning out and figuring out how I'm going to support this family when I do get out.
Yeah.
So when it came time to go to, you guys call it TAPS, we call it TRS. When it came time to go to that, I got to go the one time, and I was advised by everyone else, go more than once, go more than once. When I tried to ask if I could go again, my request was denied. And when I did start to get job interviews, I got one with SpaceX to be an integration technician on the Crew Dragon spaceship before they started launching with astronauts.
It's incredible.
I was so excited. I was not allowed to go to the interview. I was told I had to delay it. I submitted leave. I found all sorts of stuff. I found another order that stated I could request to be put on leave because I'm like a bad influence on the unit. Like I found something along those lines and was like, hey, can we use this? Like, can I use my leave? Like just to get me to my EAS, like all these things. And like it kept getting down and down to the wire, all just so that I could keep my benefits at this point. We're at the MALs. So next up is the MAG, the air group. Our squadron's seen by a lieutenant colonel. I went above him and I went to the colonel's office. Like that was the point that I got to. Like I felt like my command wasn't understanding. They weren't letting me do anything to set my family up. I couldn't see my kid, like all these things. Like I went to a colonel's office, a private, no rank, 4 NJPs. And I sat outside of his office and I waited to be seen. And I sat and I talked to him. And a week later, my paperwork was all signed and done.
Amazing. You are your own best advocate.
Well, they signed the paperwork 19 days before what would have been my EAS. So I got out with a general under honorable conditions, and my DD 214 says that I got out for drug abuse, that I am not eligible to re-enlist in any branch. So I don't have access to education benefits. I've been out for 2 years and I'm just now working with an attorney to try and get my discharge changed. And that's been the hardest part out of all of this is all of that happened only 2 years ago.
My God, it's fresh. And I can see the pain is fresh. And it's heartbreaking to hear everything that you went through. You know, obviously you're very sweet and you were young and you made some mistakes like we all do when we're young, right? But these are not the mistakes that you should be having to fight your whole life over. And I'm so glad that you have an attorney and you're going to challenge that. Don't give up. Don't give up. Keep fighting it. Keep fighting it. And I think that given some more time, all of this will begin to heal because it sounds like you've learned so much with your therapy and things of that nature to help you to get past all of this. Because I understand what a difficult transition it must have been for you. Oh my gosh. You can't see, but her baby just joined us. Hi. Oh my God. It's so cute. It looks like a doll.
That is really why I wanted to do this with you, is because, it is all fresh. And, I obsess and I watch news cycles over a plant being legalized because of how much it impacts my personal life. like all these things that I went through, the reaction that my command had over a plant like that drives me nuts. And it's something that is legal in some way, shape, or form in 36 states and is being pushed to be federally legalized so that people can make money, but I can't use my education benefit because of it. I can't go to school and better myself to better my children because of it. Like it's baffling. And I know that it's not just me. I know that it hasn't just happened to me. So as much as it hurts to talk about and as much as it frustrates me to admit to, like I thank you for giving me a space and place to practice doing that. Thank you for letting me let this out here. Because I hope that, God forbid, some other poor girl is stuck on active duty and that's what she's faced with. Like, you know, that plant might make you feel better. I advise wait, most definitely wait. But like, if it's an option and it's a safe option, why not? Everybody gets off of work and goes to buy a 6-pack, but I can't.
Mm-hmm.
I can't smoke a bowl after I got screamed at for someone else doing their job wrong that day. Like I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I've mentally gotten so detracted and derailed since they got home, but thank you.
It's okay. It's all right. I totally understand. And I know that I've taken up a lot of your time, but before we part ways, I just have one more question for you. And that is everything that you learned and everything that you went through and what you're going through now, because I know you have a huge fight ahead of you that I hope that you honestly keep fighting and get that overturned so that because you do deserve your education benefits, you served, and you put up with a lot. And it's not like you're the only person to ever have been drinking while on underage and otherwise, or have a drinking problem on active duty. In fact, Jillian from Brave Original Designs on a previous episode this season was talking about how no one stopped her and she was an obvious alcoholic and it took her forever to even get in trouble and to get herself, straightened out. But it wasn't an issue for people because drinking and over drinking is such a common thing in service, right? That no one really talks about, it's just an accepted part. So I really hope that you continue your fight for what you deserve. And my last question for you is going to be, what advice do you have for your veteran sisters coming up behind you?
For me, what has helped me not go crazy has been finding community, doing things like listening to your podcast, going to therapy, taking the suggestions that I'm given when I go to get help at the VA. Because, I lost my education benefit, but I still get my health care through the VA. So does Matthew. And I'm very, very, very grateful for everybody who works there and what they do. As much of a flawed system as it is, I'm grateful that it's there and that it exists. There is an organization that I have been talking to and trying to bring to my local area. They're called Veterans Walk and Talk. They're based out of Southern California for the most part, but they've been expanding this year. And what they do is they bring veterans together for like peer assisted therapy hikes. They encourage and they facilitate the use of medicinal plants, both psychedelic and non mushrooms, cannabis, things of that sort. Finding community, finding like-minded community. One of the things that helped me the most was the episode that you did. I can't remember her name, but she does the comedy stuff. And she said that she had to try more than one group at first. And that for me really, really helped because, there was a big part of, for me too, being in a veteran relationship. It's very easy for me to look at my partner's stuff as, my therapist says big T and mine is little t.
Mm-hmm.
But finding community, being open and honest with that community so that you're able to put yourself first and take care of yourself. Because that's the biggest thing that I struggle with. After everything that I went through and how horrible I regularly feel about myself is uh, trying to practice self-love.
Wow, that is big. So you're talking about Carolyn's episode, the author and the comedian. That's a recent one, and I love that episode. She's a coastie. She was in the CIA. It's an interesting story, and I agree. That's often my advice is to find community of like-minded people who are veterans, who understand your experience, and who are non-judgmental. And one of the big pieces of advice that you gave was about self love, I think. And everything begins and ends with how you see and feel about yourself. Everything that you want to achieve and do in life, whether it be a great mom or be the successful entrepreneur, whatever it is you want to do, if it's just to even be at peace, it begins with self love. And so I'm going to encourage you to keep looking for the things that are beautiful about yourself and focusing on those things and letting go of this identity that you received in the military. That's not who you are. You survived a set of circumstances, the ones that you escaped to go into the military. And then trying to cope with being a young woman in an environment such as the Marines, and making one mistake and not being able to overcome it was just a downward spiral for you, it seems to me. And that doesn't define who you are. You have a lot of life ahead of you. You're still really young. It's a gift. You can be anybody you want to be. You can recreate yourself a million times in your life. Lord knows I have. I'm not the same person I was yesterday. Because if you're not constantly growing and evolving, you're stagnating. And who wants to stagnate? You're not that girl that they labeled you to be in the military. And I'm so glad that you're on the path of really loving yourself and finding your way and understanding that you don't have to carry around that forever. One of my really good friends, I'll say this before we part ways. One of my really good friends while I was serving, she had gotten involved with a kind of a bad guy, and he got into trouble and he took her down with him. And she had been such a good, dutiful sailor. And it was destroying for her. She thought that she'd never be able to find a good job. She carried this shame for how, she'd already served, this was like her second tour. And she had served so long. And then to have a discharge that was not honorable. And it just destroyed her for so long. It took her so many years to recognize that that does not define her. And now she's very successful. She's exceptionally successful in her life. But she had to overcome that and let that go and recognize that that is just a little tiny part of your life. That's not who you are, and that's not who you have to be going forward. So I hope that you find whatever gives you the most joy. I know that you like art. And so I hope that you will be able to find time to do that and to keep fighting for yourself and advocating for yourself and create, this beautiful future for yourself and your beautiful family. So thank you so much for being a guest. Is there a way we can follow your journey?
I'm on Instagram under Soijana, Soijana. It's my middle name, but it's what I sign and do my art under. I will also be starting up a Sonoma County chapter of the Veterans Walk and Talk. So that'll be coming up here. I think we're shooting for March. So hikes in the Northern California area. Very, very excited to do that. Very, very excited to be of service again, and just happy to have the confidence to do something more. Thank you for letting me be here. Thank you for letting me let all of that out. Thank you. Thank you for what you do.
Oh, and well, it's my pleasure, honey. I'm the lucky one. Thank you for being open and vulnerable and willing to share, because you never know when your story is someone else's survival guide. There could be a girl serving right now that listens to this episode, and you have given her courage and hope, and let her know that she's not alone in what she's experiencing. So thank you for that. And I will put all the information about Veterans Walk and Talk in the description box below. For those of you who don't know, just scroll down after you read the description of the episode and you'll see the information there. I will also put a link to Esaia's Instagram. I do follow her. And so I hope you will follow her too, and share some love for her courage and her ability to be willing to share her story for how painful it is. It's so fresh for her, you know, so you have to respect that. And you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at the Female Veterans Podcast on Instagram, at FemVet Podcast on Twitter. Don't forget to rate these episodes on iTunes or Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen. It really helps. A positive review goes a long way to getting this show out to more people. And I really appreciate you for coming on this journey with me. Thank you so much for listening. I love you guys. Oh, and shout out to my sponsor, Grunt Style. Don't forget to check out gruntstyle.com and get your apparel. Use code Baker for your first order and check them out. So I'm so grateful for them for sponsoring this episode. I love you guys, and I'll talk to you next time.